Making headlines for this week of August 28th, financial high wire, a tired financial system on a narrow path with heavy debts amidst strong winds of change. Greek salad, attempting to find a palatable and digestible solution facing the people of Greece. Harper, then and now. Canadian PM is revealed to be contradictory in his words and also unaccountable to his actions. And the Vatican, UNICEF, the UN, and ET. What these four entities appear to now have in common.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. As most listeners have been observing throughout the week, the big story appears to be the continued fluctuations on stock markets around the world. As is usually the case, some markets have continued to show a downward trend, while others have demonstrated some degree of stability or even recovery. What is not wholly clear are the reported underlying factors that are affecting these financial events, and what are the unreported underlying factors. As CVN reported last week, China has been making increasingly greater ventures into finalizing plans, along with Russia and the BRICS countries, the Eurasian Alliance and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to implement some kind of new financial structure. This new model is being reported as being gold-backed, which would deliver what is expected to be a final blow to the US dollar as a global reserve currency. Countries around the world have long been preparing for this, although the mainstream media has been avoiding the topic until fairly recently, when they finally have begun acknowledging that something is happening, even if they are not yet allowed to describe exactly what that something is. An explosion rocked the Chinese port city of Tianjin, an explosion that has been rumored to have involved low-yield nuclear devices. There was a subsequent second explosion in China and also an explosion on a U.S. military base in Japan. Some speculation has suggested that these events are linked to everything that is playing out in the geo-economic sphere at this time. Perhaps it is a test run for alleged events that are speculated to occur in September. Perhaps it was a staged event to try to arrest and remove some more of the cabal members seeking to profit from the old dying paradigm. Perhaps it was an attempt to get as many small players out of the stock market game as possible before the plug is finally pulled. And perhaps it is one of those, perhaps it is all of those, and perhaps it is also none of those. An article appearing on the website for the Birch Gold Group on August 21st identifies the U.S. Federal Reserve as having two tools that they can use to try to prop up a sinking economy. And as it is, both of those tools are no longer working. According to the article, earlier this week, a Federal Reserve official made the stunning admission that its credit expansion and debt creation policy is no longer having any significant effect on the economy. Cutting interest rates and injecting false liquidity into the market via QE, or quantitative easing, these are the only tools in the Fed's arsenal to try to stimulate growth. However, the article continues. Albert Einstein once said, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over, yet expecting a different result." So how insane is it that the central banks around the world do the same thing over and over, expecting it to solve the same problem? Their solution to the debt problem is to create more debt. Greece is a perfect example of this insanity, using more debt to paper over previous debts. However, you could easily substitute Greece for Japan, China, or the U.S. When the economic planners keep creating debt, raising the debt ceiling, and throwing fancy terms around like quantitative easing, they are heralded as economic geniuses who should be admired. Instead, they, by the very definition given by Einstein, should be classified as insane. The writing has been on the wall for ages, but few have been willing to see the signs and call them out when they should first have been called out. An article on Zero Hedge did make mention of at least one thing back in mid-April of 2014. This article noted how the petrodollar quietly died and no one noticed. According to this article, 2 years ago, in hushed tones at first, then ever louder, the financial world began discussing that which shall never be discussed in polite company, the end of the system that, according to many, has framed and facilitated the U.S. dollar's reserve currency status, the petrodollar, or the world in which oil exports countries would recycle the dollars they received in exchange for their oil exports by purchasing more U.S.-denominated assets, boosting the financial strength of the reserve currency, leading to even higher asset prices and even more U.S.-denominated purchases and so forth, is a virtuous loop. The main thrust for this shift away from the U.S. dollar, if primarily in the non-mainstream media, was that Russia and China, as well as the rest of the BRICS nations, increasingly seeking to distance themselves from the U.S.-led developed world status quo spearheaded by the IMF. Global trade would increasingly take place through bilateral agreements which bypass the petrodollar entirely. And sure enough, this has certainly been taking place, as first Russia and China, together with Iran and ever more developing nations, have transacted among each other bypassing the U.S. dollar entirely, instead engaging in bilateral trade arrangements, leading to, among other things, such as, in today's FT, why China's renminbi offshore market has gone from nothing to billions in a short space of time. Although bilateral trading agreements have contributed to the increased depreciation for the U.S. dollar, the article observes the actions of the U.S. Fed as being one of the major culprits, along with actions by Saudi Arabia to lower the price of oil, first with the intention to punish Russia into submission, but with the side consequence of bringing down the U.S. shale gas industry. The article continues. As Reuters reports, for the first time in almost 2 decades, energy exporting countries are set to pull their petrodollars out of world markets this year, citing a study by BNP Paribas. Basically, the petrodollar, long serving as the U.S. leverage to encourage and facilitate U.S. dollar recycling and a steady reinvestment in U.S.-denominated assets by the oil-exporting nations, and thus a means to steadily increase the nominal price of all U.S.-priced assets, just drove itself into irrelevance. Perhaps the U.S. dollar is still around, and the article notes this, primarily because the dollar is still holding on to the title of reserve currency, even if only for just a little while longer, but it has managed to price itself into irrelevance. An article by Alistair MacLeod from Gold Money appearing on Zero Hedge on August 22nd writes that China's recent mini devaluations had less to do with her mounting economic challenges and more to do with a statement from the IMF on August 4th that it was proposing to defer the decision to include the yuan in the SDR until next October. SDR is the term given to the special drawing rights, a basket of currencies that are used globally. The IMF's excuse was to avoid changes at the calendar year end and to allow users of the SDR time to adjust to a potential changed basket composition. It was a poor explanation that was hardly credible, given that SDR users have already had 5 years to prepare. But the decision confirming the delay was finally released by the IMF in a statement on Wednesday the 19th. One cannot blame China for taking the view that these are delaying tactics designed to keep the yuan out, and if so, suspicion falls squarely on the U.S. as instigator. America has the most to lose, because if the yuan is accepted in the SDR, the dollar's future hegemony will be compromised, and everyone knows it. It was revealed the next day, the 23rd, in another Zero Hedge article that container freight rates from Asia to Europe had plummeted about 60% over a 3-week period. Is it possible that these rates could be the newly reflected rates of a global currency correction? Possible, but I am not qualified enough to speculate on that. So the U.S. puts off allowing the yuan to join the basket of currencies again through its influence over the IMF. It was this action that then led to the multiple devaluations of the Chinese currency, and then the hyperinflation of the U.S. dollar, the explosions in China, and the selling of U.S. debt bonds by China, which drove the markets into mass chaos. At the very least, this is what we think we know in the current moment. Will Hart, in an article appearing on the English website for the Russian news source Pravda, commented on the 7-year business cycle. He observed the following events occurring every 7 years. In 1966, there was the stock market collapse, the Vietnam War and protests. In 1973, the oil embargo. Yom Kippur War, stocks collapse and recession. In 1980, inflation, the Iran-Iraq War, silver panic, stocks crash, recession. In 1987, Black Monday, the largest single-day crash ever. In 1994, the bond collapse, the Dow Jones Industrial bear market, and a war. In 2001, the stock market crash, 9/11, and a recession. In 2008, stock market collapse on September 29th, followed by recession. So the question is going to be, what will happen this year? On August 27th, Zero Hedge reported sources in Washington as warning that it was official that China had begun to liquidate U.S. treasuries. Zero Hedge quoted Bloomberg as reporting the following. China has cut its holdings of U.S. treasuries this month to raise dollars needed to support the yuan in the wake of a shock devaluation 2 weeks ago, according to people familiar with the matter. If I was a betting man, I would be inclined to lay odds that this is not the real reason at all, especially given that we already know that China is moving ahead with its own banking system, and that it has been amassing a lot of physical gold, just like Russia. It is the story that has been fed to U.S. investors to keep the markets calm, so more knowledgeable investors can continue to fleece the investors who know very little or nothing. Alistair MacLeod closes with these poignant remarks from his article. The stakes are high, and China's devaluation of only a few percent has caused enough chaos in capital markets for now. But if the eventual answer is that the yuan will not be allowed to join this SDR basket, it will be in China's interest to increase the pace of development of the new BRICS bank, instead with its own version of an SDR, selling dollar reserves and underlying treasuries to fund it. The threat that China will turn her back on the post-war financial system and the IMF would also undermine the credibility of that institution more rapidly, perhaps, than the dollar's hegemony, if the yuan was accepted. And if a U.S.-controlled IMF loses its credibility, even America's allies will desert her just as they did to join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank a few months ago. It was always going to be the U.S. that faced a predicament from China's growing economic power. She has chosen to bluff it out instead of gracefully accepting the winds of change, as Britain did over her empire 60 years ago. Change in the economic pecking order is happening again, whether we like it or not, and China will have her way. In geopolitical news, we begin with the continuing saga of unfolding events in Greece. As of airtime on the 28th, here's how things appear to be in this country. In the wake of the resignation of Prime Minister Tsipras, who is facing a potential call for a review on his leadership, a new anti-austerity party formed, led by former Energy Minister Panagiotis Lafazanis and other disgruntled members of the Syriza party who left in protest for Tsipras' surrender to the demands of the Euro-banking cabal. According to the AMTV media website on August 25th, the Popular Unity Party is a breakaway group from the current ruling Syriza party and is led by Lafazanis. The group of 25 left-wing MPs has 3 days from today to attempt to bring together a ruling government after Greek Prime Minister Tsipras resigned last week. If the party is successful, it would cancel Greece's recently agreed bailout deal and rip up the harsh austerity measures imposed by European Union creditors before leaving the single currency. A Press TV article on August 25th quotes Lafazanis as saying that popular unity is the force that wants to represent and express the no vote with consistency, firmness, and tip the end. The referendum's no is not defeated, he said, in reference to a June 25th plebiscite in which the Greeks overwhelmingly voted against the tough austerity measures required by the country's international creditors in exchange for a third bailout package. The 3-day attempt to form a coalition apparently failed, however, and thus the Greek president, Prokopis Pavlopoulos, was forced to appoint an interim leader. With more on this, we have this report from Euronews.
Greece has its first female prime minister, albeit for 3 weeks. Vasiliki Thanou is the country's top Supreme Court judge and will lead the country to elections expected next month. Her new government will be sworn in later on Friday. The Greek president said he was obliged to appoint a new caretaker administration after failing to get party leaders to form a coalition. Thanou has been described as an anti-austerity advocate who battled against wage cuts imposed on the Greek judiciary to please lenders. Meanwhile, Thursday was Alexis Tsipras' last day in the office after resigning over a bailout rebellion. He has reiterated that his Syriza party would not cooperate with the New Democracy Party and the socialist PASOK, which ruled Greece for decades. Tsipras remains hugely popular and is already leading the polls. Our correspondent says the focus has turned to the next government. Alexis Tsipras has asked for a mandate to form a government by himself. However, initial polls, although it is very early, show that Syriza leads, but without an absolute majority.
As the report noted, the Syriza party and Tsipras, although still popular, have lost some support. There may be several reasons for this. One is the creation of the Popular Unity Party. Another is the potential creation of yet another new political party, led by the popular and very vocal Zoe Konstantinopoulou. An article from the Ikathimerini Greek-English news website reporting on August 27th that senior Syriza MP and House Speaker Zoe Konstantinopoulou is set to form her own political party ahead of snap elections expected next month, according to a report on Wednesday. Konstantinopoulou became a political sensation within Greece for being a tough yet balanced Speaker of the political house at a relatively young age of 39. She is also one whose report declared Greeks' debt to be odious and that it should not be repaid by the Greek people. Her presence could represent a strong challenge to Syriza and popular unity, assuming that the Greek people are still strongly opposed to the bailout deal that has just been dumped upon them. Although in the picture, albeit indirectly, is former Star Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis. According to the website Keep Talking Greece on August 27th, the website is reporting that the ex-finance minister is preparing to launch a European movement that will develop into a political party. Varoufakis will push for a pan-European network to fight austerity. Instead of running for the upcoming elections, he will put his energy into political action on the European level. Speaking to Late Night Live on Australian ABC National Radio, Varoufakis described the elections campaign as sad and fruitless, and said that he will not be running for Greek Parliament in the September elections, as he no longer believes in what Syriza and its leader Tsipras are doing. Varoufakis is quoted as saying the following: "The party that I served and the leader that I served has decided to change course completely and to espouse an economic policy that makes absolutely no sense, which was imposed upon us. I don't believe that we should have signed up to it, simply because within a few months the ship is going to hit rocks again, and we don't have the right to stand in front of our courageous people who voted no against this program and propose to them that we implement it, given that we know that it cannot be implemented." In a Democracy Now! Interview, economist Michael Hudson, an advisor to the Syriza party in Greece and friend of Varoufakis, described the Eurozone's efforts to wreck the Greek economy.
The story begins actually about 4 years ago when Greece had very large foreign debt taken on basically by the military government and what followed. It was obvious that as soon as the PASOK, the Socialist Party, came in, they said, look, the debt's much larger than we thought. We can't pay it. And they were going to write it down. The IMF looked in and said, Greece can't pay the debts. We've got to write them down. The board looked in, said they can't pay the debts. But then the European Central Banks came in and said, look, our job as central bankers is to support the banks. Greece owes the debt to essentially French banks and German banks, and we've got to support them. So despite the fact that the IMF was pushing for a debt write-down 4 years ago, the head of the IMF at that time, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, wanted to run for president of France. And he was told by French President Sarkozy, well, wait a minute, if French banks hold most of Greek debts, you can't, at the IMF, say that we're going to write down the debt. So they didn't. And meanwhile, the Eurozone said, we won't let you, the IMF, be part of our program, the Troika, if you don't pretend that that Greece can pay the debt. So Greece was left with a huge debt. It was pushed into depression. The GDP fell worse than it did in the 1930s. Finally, the Syriza party came in January, and Varoufakis and Tsipras thought that, okay, we can explain to the finance ministers of Europe that you can't expect to push Greece into a depression, push more austerity, and somehow austerity will enable us to repay the debt. That's crazy. And he thought that he could reason with them. And the Europeans who he was reasoning with, the central bankers, said, we're not here to talk about economics. We're lawyers. We're here to collect money. It doesn't matter that you're going to go into a depression. It doesn't matter that you're going to have another 20% of your population emigrate. We're only here to collect the payments. And if you don't pay, then we're going to pull the plug. And they pulled the plug on the Greek banks a few months ago and said, we're not going to accept any of the bank transfers payments with Greek banks here. So if you're exporting and you want credit for export, you're not going to give it to you. We're going to treat Greece like America treated Cuba and America treated North Korea. You're going to be the North Korea of Europe if you don't surrender and pay. And that's why Tsipras said, we don't want to bring an absolute, total crisis breakdown, because that would bring the right wing to power. Varoufakis said, well, he agrees that there's no alternative but to sort of surrender for the present and try to join hands with Italy, Spain, and Portugal, but he wasn't going to be the administrator of the Depression. So you had the referendum, and the Greeks now say, well, we're no matter what, we're not going to pay. And the Eurozone says, then we're going to just wreck you. We're smashing you.
An election date has now been set for September 20th. And Greece, once again, joins a list of several countries that will be going through national elections in September and October, including Spain, Portugal, and Canada. Speaking of Canada, we once again jump back across the pond to the land of the true north, but not so strong and free. What Canada is facing now is a government that exists in complete disregard and contradiction to a statement made by Harper, which you will hear in a few moments. With the Canadian election coming up on October 19th, the people will hopefully exercise enough voting power to prevent any possibility of vote-rigging fraud, of which he has been accused of in the past, and there is evidence to support that claim. There are also numerous instances of other actions taken by the party to circumvent or go around legislative and judicial process within the current government. There are the humanitarian crimes that are linked to the war of terror, crimes against Canadian soldiers, as well as crimes against civilians and military personnel of other countries, for wars that were created for profit and control of resources, and not wars for legitimate and real concern for freedom and democracy. There is also the unwavering support of the leader and the party in supporting the Zionist agenda being perpetuated by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his party and others around the world, but not including the people of Israel. I am intentionally trying to avoid going into all the messy details of this political scandal because I understand that these are details that are not really of interest to people around the world. All you really need to know is that there is a major scandal currently unfolding within the Canadian government and the Senate regarding inappropriate use of Senate funds and expense claims. There have been lies and cover-ups on numerous levels, but there are also deeper issues that are of greater interest to Canadians than to people around the world. CVN's focus is not necessarily on what has been done, but rather the information that is seeking to expose all that has been done as part of a planned and calculated agenda by a leader who is being increasingly viewed as a dictator. In the following clip from CBC's Power and Politics program, the host looks at how Harper's message has changed over time.
Today, again, Stephen Harper faced more questions about who was involved in the scheme, to have Duffy admit he had made a mistake and to have his expenses repaid. Let's look at how his messaging has changed over time, starting with Nigel Wright's departure from the PMO May 19th, 2013. He writes, "It is with great regret that I have accepted the resignation of Nigel Wright as my chief of staff. I accept that Nigel believed he was acting in the public interest, but I understand the decision he has taken to resign." Harper repeated this in question period on May 28th.
Mr. Wright accepted full responsibility for his error in this matter. He offered his resignation, and I accepted that resignation.
In June, the PM gave more details to the House of Commons, insisting no one in his office knew of this plan.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said repeatedly, it was Mr. Wright who made the decision to take his personal funds and give those to Mr. Duffy so that Mr. Duffy could reimburse the taxpayers. Those were his decisions. They were not communicated to me or to members of my office.
By October of 2013, new details of the RCMP investigation put the Duffy deal in the spotlight again. And that meant more questions to Harper, including about what role Ray Novak played.
Mr. Wright has been absolutely clear in terms of who he told he intended to repay Mr. Duffy's expenses to. He did not say Ray Novak was one of those people.
But evidence now emerging from the Duffy trial in both emails and testimony has cast doubt on that. Back to October 2013, when in an interview on private radio, the PM referred to Wright's departure not as a resignation, but this time as a firing stemming from a deception.
As you know, I had a chief of staff who made an inappropriate payment to Mr. Duffy. He was dismissed.
Mr. Speaker, on our side, there is one person responsible for this deception, and that person is Mr. Wright. It is Mr. Wright by his own admission.
Harper does not use the terms deception or dismissal any longer. Rather, the message on the campaign trail this week is about holding people accountable. As for his current chief of staff, Ray Novak, the questions continue.
Ray Novak, your current chief of staff, does he still have your confidence?
Look, I'm very clear. When people are working for me, they have my confidence. If they didn't have my confidence, they wouldn't be working for me. And in this case, I have held the two people accountable who are responsible. Mr. Duffy, who did not repay his expenses, and Mr. Wright, who allowed him not to repay his expenses. These are the two people whose actions are responsible for this situation, and that's why I've held them accountable, and I'm not going to go around holding everybody else accountable for their actions.
Now, what you missed as a listener was something of interest that appeared on the video. At approximately the 1 minute 22 second mark of the report, as Harper was trying to explain in October of 2013 that his former Chief of Staff, Nigel Wright, was clear about who knew about the payments being made, Jim Flaherty, the former finance minister, is caught with a puzzled look on his face looking at the Prime Minister. That puzzled look becomes one of surprise when Harper states that Nigel Wright did not inform Harper's current Chief of Staff, Ray Novak, about the payment. What suddenly becomes oddly suspicious is that Flaherty passed away about 5 months after this video showing the facial reactions due to a heart attack. Last week I had reported on a scandal facing the previous Liberal government in Canada that had to do with the funding of political parties. It was called the sponsorship scandal. I made reference to a quote made by Stephen Harper, who at that time was the opposition leader. Harper was speaking about the Prime Minister at that time, Paul Martin, and as it turned out, this week I came across an audio recording from the CBC that contained the exact quote I was looking for. In response to that one singular scandal, the opposition leader at that time, Harper, had this to say to Peter Mansbridge of the CBC in 2008.
I think the difficulty the Prime Minister has, Peter, is that if his party is tainted by corruption and he doesn't know all of the answers, why is it still in power running the country? I guess.
Is his government corrupt?
I believe the Liberal Party obviously has serious corruption problems, particularly. I think they're serious enough to put a cloud over the entire party. We're in a system of party government, and I think it's difficult to try and say this part of the party's bad and this part of the party's okay, which is kind of what the Prime Minister's trying to say, except he doesn't actually know which people are which.
But, you know, question is clearly left that your party, and sometimes you personally, feel that he personally is corrupt.
My difficulty with the Prime Minister at this point, Peter, is that I don't think he's been forthcoming and honest on fairly simple questions when there appear to be contradictions. My instinct is when somebody doesn't answer questions, even simple and fairly innocuous questions in a straightforward manner, there may be something else. But let me give you an example that I think is pretty serious of the ethical problems in this government at the time. On the other hand, 3/4 of Canadians are saying they want a different government. So, you know, I think we have to react cautiously. I believe the public does not yet have a full understanding of how serious and extensive this scandal is.
What has become increasingly clear is that this is a leader who clearly does not stand by his words, and his actions demonstrate also that he is one who is committed to a controlled dictatorship with no regard for due process, the Constitution, or the people. In other financial news, some interesting comments have been made by Bix Weir, a known source on global financial matters. Recently, on the Finance and Liberty program with Elijah Johnson, Weir offered some insights on what he is expecting to happen in September and October, and why.
Well, I'd first like to talk about the economic collapse that you're predicting is going to happen in late September and early October. Did you want to discuss and give us an update on this?
I believe it is going on already, and it will continue to escalate into September, October. I believe it'll be a lot like what we saw in 2008, 7 years ago, when the whole system froze up and the banks weren't lending to each other. And here we are 7 years later, and we have the exact same problems, only they're magnified. We have bubbles in the stock market and the bond market. In housing, again, unbelievably, the derivative market is 20% larger than it was in 2008. All these things are coming back in much larger ways. And, it was done by design. They are trying to crash the system, both the good guys and the bad guys, in my theories. And add to it now, we have a crashing of the oil industry, which is the largest industry in the world. And there's all kinds of bankruptcies that have already started and companies that are about to go bankrupt. Their lenders are the banks. The banks are all invested heavily in these oil-producing companies. And another obvious sign is the sovereign debt problems we're having in Greece, in Puerto Rico, around the world. That's a bigger thing than what was happening in 2008 as well. So you got all these things lining up, and then we have the silver and gold manipulation problem. We have physical silver running out all over the world. So we'll see how this all goes, but all these signs are pointing to an event come September, October. And I think, a lot of people are even predicting the event this time. So we'll see what happens.
Now, you said that the collapse is happening as we speak. Did you want to discuss some more signs that show that the collapse is actually happening right now?
Well, like I said, you're looking at the crashing of the oil markets. That's a problem for the banks. If they start getting bankruptcies in the oil sector, that's a huge part of their investments. And a lot of these banks that invest in oil are going to have to restructure, and they've already attached a lot of derivatives. A lot of these derivatives take about a month to sort out. So you've got defaults all over the place. Puerto Rico, for example, everybody's saying, well, they defaulted, so what happened to the derivatives? Well, it has to go to the ISDA, who makes the determination that there was a default situation, and then it goes to the collecting of the money that was put down on credit default swaps, and all that takes about a month to a month and a half. We saw this in 2008 as well, and it all, people would say, well, the derivatives isn't blowing up. And then all of a sudden it does. And the reason it does at about a month after is because a lot of people hedge their derivative bets. A lot of the derivative holders buy other derivatives to cover their losses if there is a credit default. And that's kind of where it kind of all rolls out. And then we saw it in October of 2008, where we had to go in and save all these banks from their derivative problems. AIG was the big one, but the AIG saving was just a bailout of the people that AIG owed. Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, JP Morgan, all those people. The derivative bubble was collapsing. And so they had to go in there with $700 billion and try to bail out the system. The same thing is happening right now, although we aren't at that point where the derivatives start failing. That will come in September, October.
Now, you've also discussed how fragile the system actually is. You recently discussed that the whole system could fall apart by the click of a keyboard. Did you want to talk a little bit about this?
Well, sure. That gets back to some of my earlier research into how we got here and how the markets became so manipulated, and how it's done using computers and derivatives to rig the markets, trading back and forth, high frequency trades back and forth. This isn't anything new. Before the 70s, there was no such thing as electronic assets at all. There were real assets, there were physical assets, there were contracts in place. Now it's nothing. Now it's a statement that you get from your bank saying, oh, we have this and we're holding it for you so you can trust us. So the electronic assets basically took over from the DTCC is supposed to clear all these transactions, stocks, bonds, mortgage-backed securities. They're not clearing them. The volumes that are trading on the exchanges are so large it's impossible to clear them. Clear them meaning, there's an exchange of money, there's an exchange of title, all the contracts are signed and swapped. Well, that's not happening. There's millions of trades going on every minute. So they're not settling these transactions. And as long as the music is playing, it's fine. It's when the music stops, like it did in 2008, before Hank Paulson went into Congress and said, give me $700 billion, the system was frozen. The stock market dropped 777 points on one day in September. That's what's going to happen. When the music stops, all these contracts, people that say, well, I own the stock in my 401k. Well, you don't own that stock unless you have a certificate with your name on it and the paper trail that it was transferred to you and put in your name. All you have is a statement from your brokerage house or your Fidelity account saying that, yeah, you own it. But there's 10 other people with that same certificate saying, I own this stock. And truthfully, these banks and these brokerage companies, they very rarely go out and buy this stuff. What they practice is net trading. So you'll buy some and someone else will sell some, and they're supposed to net it out at the end of each day, but they don't do that. According to the SEC, over 200 million shares aren't transferred. They call them failure delivers every day, every single day. And as the music keeps playing, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and worse. And if there's ever a time when that music stops playing and people aren't buying and selling, that kind of stuff will absolutely put an end to these markets, and everybody will say, okay, so it stopped trading, and the last trade for silver was at $15, and the last trade for gold was $1,100, and my Apple stock was at $100. I want that money from my brokerage account. And the brokerage will say, I'm sorry, but the system stopped. We don't have anything, so you don't have anything. So it's a big mess, and that's what they've been trying to stave off for all these years, going back to the 50s and 60s. They knew this system wasn't going to last, and they've been holding off and holding off and holding off. And now we're getting to that point where the music's going to stop, and it will test the soundness of the system. And like I said, the system is not sound at all. It's very fragile.
Definitely, and you recently reported about how you believe the system will just shut down. You said, quote, exchanges will soon close, not go up or down, just close for security purposes and never open again. So when you say never, what do you mean by that? Do you think we'll just be in a completely new financial world?
Well, it all depends on how bad the crash is. If you have a couple of these too big to fail banks going down, you need to look at the ramifications of too big to fail. Too big to fail means if they do fail, it destroys the system. If someone like JP Morgan goes down, the smaller banks aren't going to survive because their customers all work with JP Morgan as well. And it's one of those things, because we live in a fractional reserve banking system. Banks are allowed to lend, I think it's 10 or 15 to 1 right now, on their assets. Let's say 15 to 1. So every dollar they have, they lend 15. Well, in the reverse, if they start selling their assets because these other banks are selling their assets to meet the liquidity calls for their Tier 1 capital, which is their base capital that they have to keep, then you have a cascading effect. Everybody goes into these assets at the same time in the same structure, and when they come out, they sell the same things. So as you sell more and more, it forces these banks to sell more and more of their assets. That's why in a fiat system, you have to have a continually expanding bubble of money just to pay the interest on the past money that you printed. So it has to continually expand, and the minute it starts contracting, everybody starts selling assets. That's the problem. Now we'll get to a point where these banks will fail.
You've said recently that this time when the banks implode, the banks will not be bailed out. Where does your confidence come from that the banks just won't be bailed out once again?
Well, it comes from, a lot of it comes from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. They said that exact thing. And if you look at what the U.S. Treasury is doing right now, you look at the $100 bill. It talks, right on the new $100 bill, it talks about overthrowing your government. There are people within the U.S. government who know exactly what's going to happen. Now, if you look at the bailout in 2008, it was almost not done. I just posted an interview with Hank Paulson and, believe it or not, Nancy Pelosi, and it took Hank Paulson had to go to the Democrats and get on one knee and beg Nancy Pelosi, literally beg her to sign off on the bailout. That's how close we were in 2008. Here we are 7 years later. There's been movies about this. There's been massive amount of education that has gone on around the world. And we talk to 99% of the people, they're going to say, God, I hate those bankers. We should have never bailed them out. Here we are approaching September. All the bubbles are blown up once again. The exact same thing's going to happen, except on a larger scale. They're going to come back and say, well, we need $3 trillion this time. Do you think that the U.S. Congress, and I know they're corrupt, do you think they will be able to stand up and bail out these bankers without a total revolution, at least in the United States? I don't think they can. They almost fell up against a revolution back in 2008, and people didn't know anything about the fiat money system. Now we're much smarter. Now is the time to crash the system. And because it's going to be so much worse, there's going to be so much more revealed about what was going on. And had the public known about what was going on in 2008, we would not have agreed to any kind of bailout.
The link in the show summary contains the full interview for those wishing to hear the rest of the program. In general news, the UK scandal involving pedophilia appears to be gaining momentum. So much so that some UK parliamentarians are apparently getting the courage to start addressing the topic to Parliament. A YouTube video published on July the 6th covers comments made to the UK Parliament on child sex abuse by MP John Mann.
But there's one other issue that the new members need to be aware of, because it's going to haunt this Parliament. And Esther, yesterday on Sky Television, outlined it bravely, and I've been in touch with her today, where she's gone to the police with a member of Parliament that she and now a number of others are alleging abused her as a child. Well, I'll tell you, I'm expecting other people with other names coming forward from other parts of the country in the near future. Others have already done so and are with the police, large numbers of them. The scandal of historic child abuse in this country is going to be one of the defining issues of the next 5 years. It's going to corrode everything over this Parliament, because it is so large, it is so huge, it involves so many people. And just in my area, I have people come forward to me, a man kept as a slave, forced to work in a foundry, aged 11 to 16, kept as a slave. And that's nice compared to what happened to the rest of his family. Kept as a slave. I have 26 victims of child abuse just from my constituency, just so far, who've been to me, and who the hell am I for them to come to? That is how big this scandal across the country is. And the government was right last time to set up the Goddard inquiry. And I've put down, if you don't know what an early day motion is, it's usually a bit of nonsense that you sign to send letters to people telling them how good you are, but I've put one down already, calling on the government to lift the restrictions of the Official Secrets Act, because there are a lot of people, including former Special Branch, who want to speak out, who can speak out, answering the basic question that I pose to anyone who wants to know about it. Why was Cyril Smith allowed to get away with prolific child abuse for so many years? But it wasn't just Smith. There were far more. And what's been unravelled just now in Staffordshire from yesterday is just one other aspect of it. And what I found in my constituency is no worse, no different to anywhere else in the country. This is nationwide. It's every aspect of society. It is phenomenal. The numbers of people who've been to see me on top of the 26 who don't want to go and have the police involved, who never want to go public, who never actually want to say anything, because that's how, and it is their right to do it, they have dealt with that childhood trauma. The man who flew back from Canada, having never visited my constituency in 30 years because of what happened to him, to spend 20 minutes in the library in my surgery just to tell me, knowing nothing could be done, to fly back again. That is the impact of historic child abuse. This Parliament's going to have to deal with it.
The growing scandal appears set to also include the British royal family within the scope of its investigation. An article from mid-July on the Hang the Bankers website reports that Justice Lowell Goddard, the New Zealand judge chairing the independent inquiry into child sex abuse, had initially not included the royal household in a list of institutions to be investigated over historical crimes. However, a statement from the inquiry launched on Thursday later confirmed the monarchy would also be within the scope of the investigation. At this time, it appears that we have a child sex pedophilia scandal threatening to tear apart the UK system of governance. We have at least a couple of scandals and a rogue Democrat presidential candidate in the US threatening to tear down that country's system of governance. And we have numerous scandals threatening to expose and tear down Canada's system of governance. Throw in the financial stuff that is currently going on, along with the events, both known and unknown, to occur in September, and I think it would be starting to become crystal clear that the world we once knew is in a significant and massive state of flux and change. Oh, and did I include the presence of E.T.? Are we having fun yet? Personally, I am eager and excited to see what is going to unfold. In disclosure-related news for the week, speaking of E.T., there appears to be a bit more information connected to last week's story about the UNICEF video that was released showing an E.T. child attempting to be accepted at school while being teased and mocked up to the point when the child demonstrates his abilities, at which point he becomes accepted and welcomed. An article has been posted on the Exopolitics website by Dr. Michael Salla on August 27th, and Salla notes that the Vatican is also connected to the commercial. For some, this may not come as a surprise, as Pope Francis appears to be demonstrating time and time again his willingness to break traditional protocols, and he appears to be moving forward on an agenda to expose greater truths at this time to the people of our planet. According to the article, what earlier alternative media coverage of the video missed is the Vatican's involvement through an organization founded by Pope Francis, which is sponsoring the UNICEF attempt to change the way children are educated. This suggests a direct link between the Vatican and a secret United Nations effort to integrate extraterrestrial life into human society. So far, the video has generated over 7 million views. Salla also notes that an agreement signed in Rome on April 21st by Pope Francis began a 5-year period of collaboration between the Vatican-created organization Scholas Occurrentes and UNICEF. Scholas and UNICEF will initially cooperate in a series of joint activities worldwide, with the special aim of bringing an end to violence and promoting the connectedness of all young people, making the most of the unique capacities of each person to favor the participation of adolescents and to broaden their access to the tools and information they need to be connected, to communicate, and to collaborate. Scholas Occurrentes is Latin for schools meeting, which may translate more loosely and accurately into everyday English as simply being schools in, meaning that school has now started. According to the Scholas Occurrentes website, Scholas is an educational entity launched by Pope Francis where technology, arts, and sports are used to encourage social integration and the culture of encounter. The vision of the organization is to transform the world into a more integrated and peaceful society, and the mission is to improve education and integrate different communities with a special focus on those with fewer resources. This is through the commitment of all stakeholders and the linking of schools and educational networks from all over the world, and by means of educational, artistic, and sport initiatives. As to why Scholas is carrying out this mission, the website states that it is necessary to motivate the culture of encounter. Thereby, a different education has to be recreated. This education should cover the focus on the human being and in essential human values, and should encompass different circumstances that children face. This is an education with a holistic vision and with a social integration component. We all have our place in this educational initiative: doctors, police officers, artists, the homeless. The Pope calls everybody. As Pope Francis says, popular and beloved celebrities educate millions of children with their example, where sports and arts are great ways to shape human values. Hints of disclosure have been coming out from both the Pope and from Vatican astronomers during the last 2 years. Salla noted Francis's soft disclosure comments about his willingness to baptize extraterrestrials, perhaps choosing this wording to make it more acceptable to the Orthodox Catholics. A A few months later, Vatican astronomer Guy Consolmagno spoke to the Vatican perspective towards ET life at a symposium sponsored by NASA, the U.S. Library of Congress, or NASA and the U.S. Library of Congress. Sala also quoted a statement made by Francis in referring to beings of the universe as being a part of God's evolutionary plan. As was noted last week, the timing of this disclosure video is in line with numerous events alleged and known to be happening during the month of September. CVN noted last week that the Pope would be meeting U.S. President Obama on the 23rd and then would be speaking to a joint session of the U.S. Congress on the 24th, and then on the 25th he will be addressing the UN General Assembly in New York. Last week, CVN noted a story that claims NASA scientists as already having disclosed that ET life is already on our planet. An article on the Learning-Mind website on August 19th writes that Ellen Stofan, first chief NASA scientist, says that contact is inevitable, while John Grunsfeld of NASA's Science Mission Directorate says that we are almost there. It seems that widespread news of visitation is a thing of the near future, but is it more controversial than that? Stofan and Grunsfeld believe that NASA has covered up the fact that alien life has been here for some time now. Recent so-called discoveries by NASA, Earth-like planets, a twin planet to Earth, and more, suggest that activity is speeding up towards the revelation that most people around the world already know, except, allegedly, those in power. The article also references statements made by Corey Goode, a whistleblower on numerous secret space programs. The article noted that apparently last March there was a meeting on the moon to discuss secret missions and alien life. 70 private individuals and 120 officials made plans on possible alien disclosure. I am considering giving more airtime to these incredible whistleblower claims being made by Goode in upcoming broadcasts. Sala notes the following about these events. He writes, the August 10th release of the Alien Child video raises the possibility that the Pope will bring up the extraterrestrial issue during his United Nations speech. All these events coincide with a prediction concerning cosmic energies peaking on September 23rd, which is also the vernal equinox, and leading to major global changes. Sala closes with the following. It is very possible that a major papal speech concerning extraterrestrial life is being coordinated at the highest levels between leaders at the United Nations and the United States. Regardless of what the Pope chooses to disclose during his upcoming U.S. tour, it is very significant that he is linked to a secret United Nations effort to educate humanity on the importance of welcoming and integrating extraterrestrial life into human society. With higher energies beginning to ramp up on the planet affecting human consciousness, it will become ever more important to focus only on the outcome that one desires to manifest, and to avoid, as much as possible, any scenarios that are fear-based. What will happen, but if we as a collective humanity have any impact whatsoever, it is in our highest good to anchor energies only for the greatest outcome for humanity and our planet, and that is the transformation of our global society to that of a birthing galactic star nation with peace, health, abundance, and love for all. Over to tech news, and we go to the U.S. state of Hawaii. An article by Juan Cole, appearing on the Eco Watch website on August 26th, reports on the inauguration of the world's largest ocean harvesting clean energy plant. The initiative for this plant, however, follows a declaration that was made by Hawaiian Governor David Ige last June. In this first article by Juan Cole on August 26th, Cole writes that at the Asia Pacific Resilience Innovation Summit held in Honolulu, Hawaii, Governor David Ige dropped a bombshell. His administration will not use natural gas to replace the state's petroleum-fueled electricity plants, but will make a full-court press toward 100% renewables by the year 2045. Ige's decisive and ambitious energy vision is making Hawaii into the world's most important laboratory for humankind's fight against climate change. He has, in addition, attracted an unlikely and enthusiastic partner in his embrace of green energy, the U.S. Navy. Ige, trained as an electrical engineer, is leading his state in the most ambitious clean energy program in the United States. On June 8th, he signed into law a bill calling for Hawaii's electricity to be entirely generated from renewables in only 30 years. He also directed that the University of Hawaii be net carbon zero in just 20 years. The Navy is interested for several reasons, according to the article. The state's military bases want green energy, in part to ensure base security. Amanda Simpson of the Army Office of Energy Initiatives told the summit that Army bases throughout the United States have seen a quadrupling in electricity outages during the past decade, some of them caused by more frequent extreme weather events, others by aging equipment and infrastructure. It seems clear that Hawaiian bases want backup solar farms and biofuel plants in case the civilian grid falters. There have been some sources that have speculated about the Navy's involvement with regard to technologies and civilizations that are of a non-Earth origin, and it is possible that the Navy is beginning to prepare for a different kind of world where military strength may not be needed. The article writes, U.S. military installations in Hawaii not only have big plans for solar farms and leasing land and facilities to the Hawaiian Electric Company for green energy projects, they want to put their own uniformed engineers to work in research and innovation, partnering with Hawaiian and mainland entrepreneurs. In a second article by Cole, also on the 26th, he reports on the launching of the project that seeks to help move Hawaii in the direction of meeting that goal. Cole writes that now the state, Hawaii, is home to the first fully closed-cycle ocean thermal energy conversion plant, or OTEC, in the United States. A video about the project that appears within the article quotes Duke Hartman, Vice President Business Development with Mackay, the company that developed the project, as saying that about 70% of the sunlight coming to Earth lands on the ocean. Most of that is captured in the surface layers of the ocean, water in the form of heat. That's beautiful because we can extract that energy 24/7 and use that power anytime we want it, totally eliminating the need for an energy storage system. According to the website for Mackay, OTEC is a process that can produce electricity by using the temperature difference between deep cold ocean water and warm tropical surface waters. OTEC plants pump large quantities of deep cold seawater and surface seawater to run a power cycle and produce electricity. OTEC is firm power 24/7, a clean energy source, environmentally sustainable and capable of providing massive levels of energy. The initial demonstration project has an output of about 105 kilowatts, or about enough to power 120 homes, and cost about $5 million. The U.S. Navy believes so strongly in it that it has invested in the project with a goal to have the Navy cover 50% of its energy needs through alternative sources within 5 years. Although it is my personal belief and feeling that cheaper and more personal energy devices will be coming online, allowing people to live off of some kind of grid connection, what this story represents is how, at the very least, the corporate model or paradigm of existing is being challenged, and they are being forced to rethink how they currently do business. The companies that are visionary enough will very likely benefit the most from their choices to act. Perhaps it still represents a slower form of transition to newer alternative energies, but how quickly this transition takes off will depend upon the people who are becoming more aware of solutions much more quickly, and this will depend upon empowered people within the social media, if not the mainstream media. Finally, in health news, we start by taking a look at an article by Amanda Fröhlich appearing in the True Activist website on August 22nd. Fröhlich reports that there are at least 8 countries that are beginning to move increasingly towards a more vegetarian way of living. Fröhlich writes, in 2010, the United Nations released a report urging the world to adopt a predominantly plant-based diet for its environmental and health implications. Since the turn of the century, interest in vegan and vegetarian diets has dramatically increased. In fact, a number of nations are making headlines with their sustainable commitments. The author mentions another article in the New Zealand Herald, and this article notes that the increase is fueled by a motivation to help prevent disease, environmental degradation, and animal suffering on factory farms. The author of this New Zealand Herald article was quoted as saying that a decade ago, the vegan diet was considered wacky, if not plain risky. Vegans were seen as unfun characters who lived on dandelion tea and brown rice. Now, eating vegan is seriously cool. Fröhlich shares the following about 8 countries that are moving in this direction. Number 1, she writes, is Spain, and she references an article appearing in the London Guardian that wrote the following. Spanish people have a reputation as die-hard meat eaters, but in recent years, as the number of vegan or vegetarian restaurants in Spain has doubled, there are signs of change. The author continues, the idea that we should, at the very least, eat less meat is increasingly common in Spain, as in many other parts of Europe. Number 2, she writes the UK. Interestingly, 12% of the population now identifies as vegetarian or vegan, but that percentage jumps to 20% for people between the ages of 16 and 24. That's not all. Millions more in the UK are flexitarians, meaning that they have cut back on their meat consumption dramatically, but still consume it once in a while. Number 3 she lists is Sweden. According to the article, not only has the nation run out of garbage and is importing trash from neighboring countries to burn for fuel, its government is contemplating a meat tax. That said, it should come as no surprise then that nearly 10% of the country now identifies as vegetarian or vegan, and the millennial generation is leading the way. Animal Rights Sweden conducted a poll and learned that in the past 5 years, the number of vegetarians in the country has increased by 4%. Number 4 is Israel, and what is interesting here is that the author notes that 4% of the nation's population is apparently vegan, making Israel the vegan capital of the world. Number 5 is India, and the article writes that this largely vegetarian country became even more veg-friendly last year. As the Mercy for Animals blog relays, last year the Indian city of Palitana became the first all-vegetarian city in the world. Monks in this country spurred this revolutionary change by going on a hunger strike to pressure the state of Gujarat to outlaw animal slaughter in their city. Their efforts proved to be successful, and shortly after, the government imposed a ban on animal slaughter and outlawed the sale of meat and eggs. Number 6, Germany. Fröhlich writes that it may seem shocking that the nation renowned for bratwurst is now home to over 7 million vegetarians, but the demand for plant-based products is only increasing. Even the nation's 200-year-old Oktoberfest, a meat-laden annual German beer festival, has started serving delicious vegan versions of traditional favorites to satiate attendees' appetites. In addition, the owner of Vegans, an all-vegan supermarket chain based in Germany, has ambitious plans of opening 60 more stores by the year 2020. This due to popular demand. Number 7, Canada. According to results from a survey of Canadian food consumption for 2013, citizens in this nation have decreased their meat consumption by almost 10% since the year 2011. A general decrease was noted across all meat categories, but the most noteworthy decline was seen in pork consumption, with a decrease of 4.5%. Not only that, last year, the Huffington Post Canada highlighted Canada's growing trend away from the consumption of milk. It seems consumption of dairy products has dropped 25% as more nutritious, humane, and dairy-free alternatives, like soy and almond milk, have become available. And number 8, the United States. The country is doing something right in its quest to curb skyrocketing diseases of affluence like diabetes, cancer, and heart disease by reducing its consumption of animal products. Other private investors are putting millions into vegan food startups. One example is in a Huffington Post article from last June 18th, reporting on a vegetarian drive-through restaurant called Amy's Kitchen, which has been a phenomenal success since its opening day, having long lineups for orders day after day. Although the article does share good news, there is also information that is not contained in the article that consumers have to be careful about. For those who are in the know, they are aware of a global campaign by the elite controllers to contaminate the food supply and also attempt to buy out companies that are attempting to offer healthy products. This is why research is so important. The article does not mention how extensive genetically modified products are in countries like the US and in Canada, offering GMO soy, corn, and other products. Although the article mentions that Canadians are moving more and more away from milk in their diets, the article suggests that they are making choices that are allegedly healthier, but the article does not mention that a vast majority of the so-called healthier drinks in Canada also contain a compound called carrageenan, which is apparently a substance that has the potential to accelerate tumor growth. In the show summary for this story, links will be included to a couple of websites, chooseveg.com and thevegetariantimes.com, where one can find vegetarian recipes and other information about a vegetarian lifestyle. Coming up in this week's Final Words, I'll share a few comments on the movement towards a vegan or vegetarian lifestyle, but also how the vegans may have the right idea, but perhaps not the best argument for their lifestyle choice. For long-time listeners to CVN, the dangers that have been present in dental fillings of yesteryear are fairly well known. It is no longer a big secret that amalgam fillings have contained mercury, a substance that is now known to be very toxic. In this week's FYI segment, Alice Coppers shares a bit more information on this subject as it relates to Alzheimer's patients and also to pregnant women and their unborn children.
Last week, we spoke more about glyphosate and how glyphosate is a neurotoxin that enters the spinal column and into the brain area and has a severe effect on the endocrine system at the center of the brain. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the effects of mercury amalgams on Alzheimer's and on unborn fetuses of pregnant women. Mercury amalgams were termed silver fillings back in the 60s, but they contain 50% mercury. Mercury is more dangerous than arsenic and lead. Before the Civil War, mercury vapor was discovered and used as a bioweapon and neurotoxin. The vapor from mercury in teeth is released every time we chew, brush, swallow, or drink hot fluids. Mercury causes the teeth to crack. The World Health Organization disagrees with the American Dental Association and deemed amalgam fillings toxic at any level in 1994. 100 million amalgam fillings per year are installed into Americans' teeth who are not taught about toxins or toxin removal. Sweden and Denmark have outlawed mercury fillings since the mid-90s because they found damage to kidney, liver, and brain. Also, mercury is highly disruptive to the sodium and potassium balance. This is by Dr. Hal Higgins. The Food and Drug Administration stated the use of mercury is affecting the brains and nervous systems in humans, especially in children. Some of the symptoms of mercury poisoning include fatigue, acne, poor memory, focus, and retention, inability and irritability to calm the self, depression, sudden onset suicide, that's a good one, severe emotional distress and outbursts. And this is the Brian Paddlecord story reference. And if you have young children, the severe emotional sleep disturbances and emotional outbursts are probably the most obvious because they don't have the words yet to tell what's going on. Also, using plastic and polymer alternatives to silver fillings are cheaper and less harmful to the environment. Dr. Akita Green shows his research for how amalgams cause fibromyalgia, thyroid disease, neurological diseases including Alzheimer's, chronic pain, arthritis, and severe hair loss. Mercury exposure in fish is caused by 2 million pounds of mercury removed fillings found in our water system, waterways, riverways, and ocean. He states that due to the liability in the U.S., the American Dental Association will never admit that this poison kills because they're afraid of legal lawsuits. The company Degussa, which was the largest manufacturer of silver amalgams, quit making them because of fear of legal actions. Dr. Don Gilbert did a 6-hour urine analysis on himself and found extremely high levels of mercury in his urine after getting severe migraines and severe sleep disturbances at 35 years old. Mercury removes the cell's ability to carry oxygen, and also glutathione is severely depleted by mercury. He found that seeds and grains are treated with methylmercury chlorine bleach, as well as used in fabric softener, cosmetics, laxatives, suppositories, wood preservatives, plastics, and the ink that is used for tattoos and printers. Mercury is a cumulative poison that is retained in the pain center of the brain. A child suffering from mercury poisoning might exhibit severe behavioral problems, depression, irritability, hyperactivity, inability to focus, as well as it exacerbates the allergic reactions or asthma. Often people suffer from loose teeth, bad gums, or cracked teeth, as well as yeast infections when they have mercury poisoning. Thank you, and have a safe week.
Alice has informed me that she is needing to take a break from her FYI reports, so this will be her last report until sometime in October. FYI is researched and presented by Alice Coppers and may or may not necessarily reflect the opinion of CVN. As always, it is up to each individual interpreting any information offered to do greater research to determine whether or not the health-related information has any meaning for anyone in any particular moment of now. Alice's email address appears in the show summary for anyone wishing to ask questions. In this week's final words, as mentioned a few moments ago in the first health story, more and more people are beginning to make a lifestyle switch towards becoming more vegetarian or vegan. As a result, some companies are taking the initiative to increasingly offer more and more vegetarian and vegan choices for consumers. In turn, this also puts some pressure on national governments, and as the article suggested, there are a few countries leading the way in moving towards healthier lifestyle choices where food is concerned, although, admittedly, these are not always necessarily by government choice. However, all may not exactly be as it seems. This has been one of my own personal issues with regard to the mainstream media. A story such as the one reported gives the impression of great news, but when it comes from the control media, a great deal of discernment is required, as most listeners already know. Consider this example. It is perhaps not surprising that items like toothpaste are being exposed as not being particularly healthy because they contain sodium fluoride, and in some cases, even other chemicals and possibly even plastic particles. In this case, there have been recommendations that include, among others, using coconut oil and baking soda for brushing one's teeth. In the article, however, there were, in my opinion, some important things that were left out that I personally feel are important to include, unless it is the knowing or unknowing intention of the article to mislead people in other directions. Many are now starting to witness the collapse of this group I have called the global cabal. This doesn't mean that they are powerless yet, however. The main intention of this group over decades, and arguably even a few centuries, has been the slow and calculated takeover of all the institutions that people look to for survival within their respective municipal, provincial, territorial, and national societies. As the banking system was gradually taken over, so too was the legal system with its commercial rules that have not been democratically consented to by the respective peoples of a given country. With these institutions hijacked, it became increasingly easy to create rules hidden within terminology that the ordinary people would not understand, that would give preference to those who understood the terminology and who understood the game. This, in turn, would only be more harmful to the average individual because he or she would be forced to consent to rules under the color of law without ever having been given a say as to whether or not one wishes to accept certain commercial contracts that are sold as rules or as law. However, that is getting off track a bit. Coming back to the story in question, the article notes that countries are moving in a healthier direction. At first glance, this seems like extremely good news, and most people will rush to share the article with friends and family because people can use this article as a justification to friends and family that one's particular view of being vegetarian or vegan is right. Canada was one of the countries listed in that article as being supposedly better in moving towards healthier lifestyle choices. The same with the U.S. I will use Canada as the example, as I am most familiar with its governance and its flaws. From a young age, I was taught in school to eat from the 4 main food groups: meat, dairy, grains, and then fruit and vegetables together. Arguably, maybe things were truly healthier when I was younger. Maybe the animals were not injected with as many drugs, and perhaps back then animals were more free range and thus happier. We were told wheat was healthy, although it is now being shown that wheat may not be healthy at all and may in fact be considered an addictive toxin. We were told to drink only cow milk without being told that the enzymes in bovine milk are not the most compatible for human consumption. Fruits and vegetables may have been healthier then, before biotech companies came along with their pesticides and other chemicals to treat the soil for greater productivity and protection. The article suggests that moving away from these food groups is a good thing, and this may depend upon one's perspective. The countries that have been listed in the article, what choices have their governments made with regard to creating a healthier food system for their people? Sure, the country may be moving in a direction towards a more vegetarian lifestyle, but what good is that lifestyle when the government is allowing biotech companies like Monsanto to create dangerous genetically modified foods while spraying chemicals that are harmful for human consumption? While many European and South American countries have taken steps to ban companies like Monsanto, Canada and the US have not yet done so. Therefore, this article has painted a picture that is not entirely accurate, and perhaps this is because someone or some agency at some level has bought its way into being promoted in this manner to brainwash people, just as the dairy lobby and the agriculture lobby groups pushed to have the Government of Canada include cow milk, grains, and also meats within the groups of food that were considered healthy. The article mentioned that Canada is also moving away from dairy milk towards other products such as almond milk, soy milk, and similar, without telling people that a large, perhaps even very large number of those milks contain a compound called carrageenan that I mentioned earlier in the newscast. Even without the carrageenan, however, products contain abnormal levels of sugars and processed salts, and many milks have been pasteurized so they can stay on the shelves for longer periods of time. All of this is very unhealthy. The purpose of this story is not to say that the article is wrong or not true. There is valuable information, and I also believe positive information contained within this article, but what it highlights more is the importance of practicing one's own discernment in looking at information and perhaps making a reasonable attempt to research what parts may be accurate and which other parts may not be accurate before blindly sharing and forwarding all information on. It is about trying to properly inform and educate so people can begin to connect the dots towards seeing what the root problem is of all that we are experiencing. Anyone choosing to share or forward information ultimately bears some degree of responsibility in its accuracy. As most listeners know, I was reminded of this within the last 2 weeks by making my own mistake in broadcasting a story. The responsibility was my own, and I also had to assume the responsibility of doing everything I could to correct the message I had communicated to my listeners. There are increasing numbers of articles and research into vegan bodybuilders who appear to be shattering the myth that a meat-based diet is important to body mass in weight training. There are some very good reasons for moving towards creating a more vegan or vegetarian lifestyle. There are absolutely advantages. Factory-bred cows and other animals consume vast amounts of water resources to sustain them. The animals are treated very harshly, in poor conditions, and many have been injected with drugs. The animals are also killed in very painful, inhumane ways, and all of this offers very good reasons for making the choice to move to a healthier way of living. There is one issue I have with vegetarians who use the argument that animal lives are important as their only argument for choosing a vegetarian lifestyle. I applaud their choice and I celebrate it, but unfortunately they are using what I consider to be a very flawed argument. Cleve Baxter, a former CIA interrogator who invented the lie detector, conducted an experiment in the 60s to see how plants react to physical and emotional harm. For those who are passionate gardeners, They will know intimately how plants are connected and interconnected to the larger chain of life. Perhaps, to no surprise, Baxter demonstrated that plants experience the energetic equivalent to fear and pain. Therefore, it is not a valid argument to place the consciousness of animals as being above that of plants. Everything is energy, and everything is connected and interconnected. If one is going to use such an argument, one would be better off to become a breatharian and live only off the sunlight and perhaps water. Some of you may be ready to laugh at me on that one, but if you research that topic, you will find that there are people who allegedly claim to be breatharians and appear to be doing it successfully. Therefore, until humanity evolves beyond the need for physical food where we have to harm other aspects of life, we have to find a way to make the best with what we have. For the record, I, personally, am trying to move towards a more vegetarian lifestyle, although I have still eaten some meat from time to time. When I have done so, I have tried to put energies of love and gratitude into the food to release and heal as much of the negativity as possible, and to honor the animal spirit that gave its life for others. Most, if not all, of the indigenous cultures and tribes of countries around the world carry the indigenous earth wisdom within them, and they have lived on both plants and animals for food. There is a different psychology, however, within the indigenous cultures and tribes of earth, for they only take that which they need in any moment. They do not hoard or raise animals for mass slaughter and sale. When consumed from a nearby garden, plants have a living energy that dead animals do not. This is another good reason for becoming a vegetarian. However, while we are still here in physical form, and while some choose to consume meat on some level, it is the gratitude that we practice, even with the salads, that show one's ability to honor life and be thankful for it and for the energies that were sacrificed in order that another organism might continue to survive, at least until physical food is no longer required. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is also available on the website. CVN can be followed through the CVN Facebook page, Scene page, and YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that love is the ability and willingness to allow those that you care for to be what they choose for themselves, without any insistence that they satisfy you. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love. Hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosures unfolding all around you. Namaste.